Good morning, Shedders. You're very welcome this morning to our second webinar on governance training. I have Marion back with us this morning. So Marion Bernard from Carmichael, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this morning. We're going to touch on a couple of subjects this morning around AGMs and EGMs and I suppose an overview of our last session with Marion. So I'll just pass you over. Thanks very much, Marion. And when it comes to Q&A, I'll come back in with you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva, and good morning, everybody. I think it's still the morning time, and I'm very pleased to be with you again for this second webinar on governance. And as Eva said, there was a special interest in AGMs and EGM, so I'm going to cover a bit of that. So I'm going to start by sharing the screen. Okay, so as Eva said, I'm here today from Carmichael, and I'm giving the webinar on behalf of the Irish Men's Sheds Association to all of you in the men's sheds across the country. Briefly about Carmichael, it's a training body for non-profits in Ireland, training and support, facilitates 40 to 45 scheduled workshops every year, currently online due to the continuing COVID situation, and we also provide customised training and consultancies across Ireland. Carmichael also provides accommodation for not-for-profits, so they can work out of a shared space and pool resources and tap into peer-to-peer support. And this saves time, reduces costs, and means that the not-for-profits can concentrate more on delivering good services to their beneficiaries. So this is today, we're looking at governance, constitution, AGM and EGM, and then we'll briefly look at tools for good governance for your men's shed. So as Eva said, this is the second webinar on governance, and to keep it in context, we're going to start with a quick recap of what governance is for your organisation, what men's sheds are as an organisation, and a very important constitution document, which is a key governing document. So we're going to go through a recap of all of that. That was done at the first webinar. Then, following your feedback on what you'd like to cover, we will examine in detail the requirement for an AGM, an annual general meeting, and why you would need to have an EGM, which is an extraordinary general meeting, or it's also known as a SGM, special general meeting, and how each of those are run, and just go through those. Finally, as I said, we'll do a quick recap of the Toolkit for good governance, you know, the go-to place, which is the Charities Regulators Governance Code. And at the end then, there'll be questions and answers, time for that, about maybe half an hour at the end or so. Okay. So governance. So again, to recap, the need for governance exists anytime a group of people come together to accomplish a common goal, such as maybe to set up a business, a charity, or in your case, a men's shed for your community. The organisation is formed as its own entity. It's not owned by anyone, or it could be argued it's owned by everybody, and we discussed that a little bit at the last webinar. But most definitions on governance are based on three parts. Firstly, authority. So as I said, when nobody actually owns an organisation, or when everybody owns an organisation, such as the men's sheds, obviously no one person is in charge, or they shouldn't be in charge anyway. So there must be a system in place to share authority. Secondly, decision making. Again, in these types of organisation, there must be a process in place around decision making. Who makes the decisions and how are these decisions made? Finally, accountability. So who's accountable for the services, the finances, and the affairs of these types of organisation? So nobody wants to fund you unless there's accountability, especially if it all goes wrong. And unfortunately, there's no praise for when things run smoothly. That's just expected. But accountability is something that's very much needed when things go a bit wrong. So to summarise, governance is about having systems in place around authority, decision making, and accountability in organisations where nobody or everybody owns the organisation, depending on what way you look at it. So in an organisation like your men's shed. definition of good governance here by the charities regulator. Good governance involves putting in place systems and processes to ensure your organisation achieves its objectives with integrity and is managed in an effective, accountable and transparent way. So it's really about those systems and processes within your organisation. We discussed this again at the last webinar, who is in charge of governance, and that is the management committee. So again, it all sounds very important and business-like, like this picture here, and it is, of course, but I prefer to think of the management committee as a team, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, where you're not working for any monetary reward, as you would be if it was a business, but rather because you want to help maintain a valuable organisation in your community. So the motivations and the outfits may be different, but basically they have the same function when it comes to governance. So the management committee is responsible for the governance of the organisation. They have collective and individual responsibility for the control, direction and management of the affairs, funds and records of the organisation. So basically the management committee have responsibility for the governance and really everything to do with running the organisation. It's overall responsibility. They don't have to do everything. You might have other people doing certain things, but they have the responsibility to make sure things are done correctly. So things like ensuring that, in your case, the shed stays true to its aims and its ethos, for preparing, following and complying with the shed's constitution, for setting the shed's policies and checking them regularly for effectiveness and appropriateness, for monitoring the good order of the shed's finances, for ensuring the legality of the shed's operations, make sure everything you're doing is legal, and for providing leadership, direction and renewal for the organisation. Good governance is about making sure that your organisation is controlled and managed in such a way that protects the organisation's reputation and encourages public trust and confidence in the individual men's shed, and also in men's shed as a group of organisation. Because if something goes wrong in one men's shed, it will affect the reputation of everybody really, even though other sheds may be working very well. So the key governance roles, which we went through at the last webinar, just mention them again here. Obviously, anybody who's on the committee is playing a key part in governance. The chairperson really has the leadership role. Is responsible for leading the organisation really, but leading those committee meetings and leading the committee. The secretary then is more of an administrative role, and it's a support role to the chairperson and to the committee. And then the treasurer, of course, is in charge of all the finances and reporting on the finances and keeping an eye that things are going okay in that part of the organisation. So to backtrack a bit now, it's useful to look at what type of organisation you are. As I said, each not-for-profit is its own separate entity, often set up and run by volunteers for the benefit of a particular community or segment of society. So a community group is a group of people who work for the benefit of the public. Community groups may follow a set structure and adopt principles and codes of conduct which it wishes the community to follow. So like your men's shed, the members come together to support each other, learn from each other, inspire each other, and to feel a sense of fellowship, safety, and belonging together. A social enterprise, another type of community organisation, another type of not-for-profit, focuses on trading in order to generate surplus. So they're similar to a business because they charge for services, but they have social objectives and surpluses go back into the organisation. Then charities must be of benefit to a particular group of people, and they must have a charitable purpose. So in charity law, there's 4 categories of charity purpose. Firstly, the prevention or relief of poverty. Secondly, the advancement of education. Thirdly, the advancement of religion. And fourthly, any other benefit to the community. And by law, charity trustees, so charity trustees are the people who are in charge of charities, and that may be committee members if it's not a company limited by guarantee. They must ensure that their charity promotes its charitable purpose only and is of public benefit. Charities tend to be more involved in fundraising, and if you're a registered charity, there are various tax exemptions which can be very useful. So it depends on what you want to do as an organisation. To get some type of scale to an organisation, it's usually necessary to become a company limited by guarantee, whether you're community organisation, a charity or a social enterprise. But then if you do become a company limited by guarantee, you are into additional compliance requirements with audits and dealing with the company's office and various other things. So again, as I said before, we looked at what type of organisation your men's shed is at the last webinar, and each men's shed is really its own separate community group, whether some may have decided to go down the road of becoming a registered charity or a company limited by guarantee. But at a very fundamental level, the men's shed is really a community group set up and run by volunteers for the benefit of a particular community. So again, what is the purpose of a men's shed? To provide a venue for men to talk and connect with others while participating in group and or individual projects, to provide opportunities for friendship and socializing in a safe environment, while at the same time providing the space, expertise and facilities for men to pursue hobbies, crafts and creativity, to undertake projects acceptable to the group which are of benefit to the individual groups and the broader community. So I'm sure some men's sheds are a bit different, and there's probably lots more to it and lots more benefits to being involved. But this gives an idea of what the men's shed is all about. So knowing what the organisation is and what its purpose is was essential for me when researching the first webinar, and I've been thinking about it ever since when I'm doing the preparation for this one as well. And that's equally true of anyone involved with your organisation. So be that a service user, a committee member, a funder, or any member of your community. Equally, people may want to know how you do things and what will happen if you close down, etc. So before you do anything as an organisation, you must have an overarching governing document in place for the organisation that explains all this, and that documents the Constitution. And we did look at that at the other webinar. We'll just have a quick recap of what the Constitution is. A Constitution is simply the aims and rules that your organisation will use. It's a statement of what your organisation is going to do and how it's going to do it. Any organisation should have an established Constitution and bylaws at the beginning in order to have a standard for organisational decisions as well as for the definition of its identity. So that Constitution is really, really an important document when you're setting up the organisation, and it's something that it's your go-to document all the time. Bylaws there are just the processes that are in place. So what should be in your Constitution? This is the Constitution checklist that we looked at the last time. So the name should reflect the community or aims of your organisation. The aims then should detail why you are setting up or have set up a shed, detail what the aims of the shed are, what needs it will fill, and how the aim is of benefit to your community. Very importantly then, the powers. The Constitution will give the shed powers to raise money, open a bank account, pay expenses, take out insurance, create a management committee, appoint the officers, hold management committee meetings at which binding decisions can be made. So that when the organisation gets powers, it becomes its own entity, and that's really important in the type of organisation that it is. Membership requirements, these will also be a part of the Constitution and will detail the membership requirements of your particular shed. So maybe it would be that the members must be over 18 or live in a particular area. Membership responsibilities then, it's very important that people know their responsibilities of becoming a member, and the Constitution should describe what those responsibilities are, and then what will happen to members who don't meet their responsibilities. Are they asked to leave? Is there an appeal process? Committees then, the role of the management committee should be described in the Constitution. The arrangements for committee meetings should be outlined, including what is a quorum, so what's the lowest number of attendees at these committee meetings needed to validly hold a meeting and take decisions. What happens if there's a vote split 50-50? Does the chair have a second vote, or is the matter put forward to the next meeting? Notes and minutes taken, how long are they kept? Are they signed off by the chair? And how often minutes should happen? Officer duties then are also part of the Constitution. We'll detail a listing of what the officer positions are available, with basic job descriptions included. So the chairperson, the treasurer, secretary, usually, and limit as to how long a person can hold any committee role. The Constitution must include that the bank account must require a minimum of 2 signatures to operate the account. Then the Constitution will also outline elections and voting. So it'll outline a standard procedure for voting and elections to ensure the committee continues from year to year. So that's how the voting is done at the AGM, which we're going to talk about the AGM in a minute. The Constitution describes how the annual general meeting will be run. Amendments then, the Constitution will also include a procedure for adding to or changing to its own bylaws. So if you want to change any of the processes in the Constitution, a set procedure has to be followed, and those procedures will be in the Constitution itself. And it will also include what percentage of members must approve an amendment for it to pass. So again, down to the voting. Dissolution, the Constitution should always include a procedure for dissolving the shed and state what will be done with any remaining assets. So usually any assets remaining after the satisfaction of debts and liabilities will be given to a similar organisation with, causes of benefit to the community. The Constitution should be clear and understandable. Quite often, legal constitutions can be not very, they can be using legal jargon, but if you're a community organisation, you're not a company limited by guarantee, and you're not a charity, you keep it as simple as you can so that people can read it and refer to it, and it makes good sense to everybody. The IMSA has an excellent template for the Irish Men's Sheds Constitution. So that was just a recap on the Constitution, but it is really important to have that document in place. So on to the AGM. So the AGM is the most important meeting of the year, and at this meeting it enables the members to play their role in the governance of the organisation. So the day-to-day governance of the organisation is run by the management committee, or if it's a company limited by guarantee, the board of directors. But the members, it's really important for these types of organisations who are owned by everybody really, that the members have their say as well, and that the annual general meeting is when that happens. So the annual general meeting, by its title, it's annual. It should be held each year at such a time and place as determined by the committee at approximately 12 monthly intervals, but generally no more than 15 months after the date of previous AGM. So that's a bit of a rule of thumb. It will say in the Constitution when the AGM is expected to be held. Generally, constitutions follow the guidance of the Companies Act or the Charities Act, what's recommended in those for organisations who are, small community organisations. So that's kind of where those, criteria are coming from. So it is a legal requirement for registered charities and companies limited by guarantees to have an AGM, but any well-run community organisation such as the Men's Shed is also required to hold an AGM under the requirements of their constitution. So it will always be part of the constitution. So what is the AGM all about? It's an opportunity, one, for the management committee to report to the members on the financial governance and operational performance of the organisation. So go through, the accounts and how the money was spent during the year, what activities were done during the year, how the governance happened within the organisation. And also then it's an opportunity for members to participate in decisions affecting the organisation. So it's really, provides a platform for the member voices to be heard with regard to the running of the organisation. It should be well attended by members, and members should be satisfied that the organisation is well governed. It inspires the trust of the members when there's a good AGM, a good informative AGM. And if there's no AGM, and therefore no transparency as to the performance of the organisation, this will cause mistrust and uncertainty with the members. So the AGM is just so important overall, to have. So I see a few questions about, the COVID and the implications of COVID with the AGM. So I'll cover that a little bit as we go along. But it is really important to do your level best to have that AGM, because you know, you are a member organisation, and it's important to keep the members involved, and that, you know, to maintain that trust, so that they know, even during COVID, when things are very quiet and strange, what's going on with the organisation, what's going on with the money. You know, people tend to get stressed about money issues, I suppose. So it's a good idea to keep people informed about that as well. So preparing for the AGM there. AGMs are quite procedural, and the requirements will be laid out in the Constitution document, as I said. Companies limited by guarantee and registered charities will have more legal requirements, in addition really to, well, it'd probably be in the Constitution, but they would have more requirements than a community organisation. But anyway, the first thing you need to do when planning your AGM is to read the Constitution. Secondly, then decide on the venue. So the venue should be convenient and comfortable for attendees. In the good days when we could have physical venues, we'd usually have, most places would order a bit of food for afterwards, and there'd be a little bit of organisation with the, you know, the actual venue and making it a nice event. It's a member event, so all current members should be formally invited. If you are a company limited by guarantee, there'll be an auditor, and the auditor should also be invited. And then, as I say, often people hold a small social or information event before the AGM, and non-members may be invited to that, but only members can vote. One member, one vote, democratic organisation. Notice should be sent out for the meeting, and it's generally 21 days clear of postage and the date of meeting. So, you know, 3 weeks. It can be shorter than that. Sometimes, if 2/3 of the members agree, you can make that 7 days. Now, it will depend on your constitution, but that would be according to some of the legal requirements. If someone accidentally gets left out of an AGM due to non-receipt of the AGM notice, this doesn't invalidate the meeting, it can go ahead. What documents should be sent out for an AGM? So there should be the AGM notice, which will tell the member that the AGM's on, what date it's on. That notice itself will be dated so that we can show that we gave people enough notice. And the notice may contain the agenda, which provides the order of business, and any special resolution. So any proposed changes to the Constitution should be outlined in the AGM notice. It would need a vote. Also, details of the nominations of the key roles. So, you know, the chairperson, secretary and treasurer. Details of resignation and committee rotation, if that's required. Some constitutions will require that, you know, 1/3 of the committee resign at each AGM, and then they can be re-elected. So those details would be in that AGM pack as well. The annual accounts should be agreed by the committee ahead of the AGM, and then formally adopted at the AGM. So it's important that they're also sent out to the membership ahead of time, so that the members have time to look at the accounts. For larger organisations, the audited accounts must be approved by the board ahead of the AGM, and the AGM is the place for appointment or removal of the auditor, or changing the auditor, and also remuneration of the auditor is done at the AGM as well, if applicable. So those are the kind of basics for the AGM. There's sometimes, I suppose, that there can be, depend on the Constitution as well, but there may be an option for voting by proxy or postal votes on decisions. And if that's the case, then those forms should be sent out at that time as well. So proceedings at an AGM then. So, you know, how does the AGM go? The AGM is chaired by the chairperson of the committee, generally, or a nominated person. And before the meeting starts, they need to confirm that there's a quorum as per the Constitution. So I think the example Constitution for the Men's Shed says a quorum should be 8 members. So if you don't have 8 members, you can't go ahead with the meeting. Minutes, of course, very important. Minutes should be taken to record the business and the decisions at the AGM. And minutes are generally compiled by the secretary while the meeting is in progress. So, you know, importantly, one of the first items on the agenda is the approval of the previous year's minutes. So those minutes are very important to keep as a document of the decisions and the voting processes at your annual general meeting. The order of business or agenda should be followed. Sometimes, again, depending on the organisation, if there's legal requirements that can be quite prescriptive on the order of business. But generally, for community organisations, you're just following your agenda. The elections are held then to decide who will govern the organisation for the coming year. So that's the election of your key roles, the chairperson, the secretary, and the treasurer. So again, auditors, if there is an auditor requirement, that there would be a voting in of the auditor as well. So the election procedure should be followed as outlined in your constitution. Those are the procedures at the AGM. So it is quite a procedural type of event, the main AGM part, but as I said, around it then you can make it about the members, make it a lot about the activities during the year, showing what good work the organisation did during the year, inspiring people around the ethos and values of the organisation. It's a great opportunity to engage with the membership, and it really should be utilised as much as possible and get as many members to come to it as you possibly can. So just a quick slide there on AGM minutes, what should be in those minutes. The minutes are a brief but accurate record of the business transacted at the meeting to which they refer. So the style of minute taking may differ, but generally they should contain the following: apologies for any absences, the attendees, all motions and amendments as proposed and seconded with the person's name. So proposed by Marion, seconded by Pat, or whatever, make sure you include that. And then if there's voting for things, include that. So you might say proposed and seconded with a show of hands. You might want to put down the number of people that have voted, especially if some people are voting against, maybe, that you document that voting process, how many voted for and how many voted against, and what the decision was that was carried, and the chairperson's decision on the matter of order. So it's really important to include everything in the AGM minutes. Like any meeting, it's important to keep the minutes. Now, this is probably more what people's AGMs look like these days, kind of. Okay. So under the current COVID-19 pandemic and restrictions on movements, Zoom meetings, Teams, and other technology has routinely been used for AGMs. So, if you can't hold your AGM in a traditional face-to-face format, you can certainly do it on Zoom. It does take a little bit of this. Well, it's the same organising. You need to make sure and tell people how it's going to be held. So it's going to be held online, and there might be a little bit of training and direction so that people know how to dial in using the Zoom link or whatever they have to do. Most people at this stage are quite familiar with that type of thing anyway, and obviously this webinar today is we all have to use a Zoom link to Zoom in. So it's just something that people will have to adapt to, and I suppose to ensure to get that member participation, it's just something that we just have to do these days. For some organisations, bigger organisations that are company limited with guarantee, it wasn't actually possible to do annual general meetings this way due to the legislation, really. The meetings had to be held face to face under the actual law. So what they've done is they've actually changed the law. They've brought in 2 new pieces of legislation, which I'm not going to start reading out, but basically it's given organisations who have legal requirements to hold their AGMs at certain times, they've given them longer until they have to have their AGM, and they've actually allowed them to convene and hold annual general meetings or extraordinary general meetings by virtual means, so Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or whatever. With the proviso that all those entitled to attend have a reasonable opportunity to participate. So this then would override any provision in the organisation's constitution that might prevent them from doing that. So the constitution may say that the AGM has to be a face-to-face meeting. Again, where there's a legal requirement using technology, organisations have to be careful how it all working and make sure that it works on the day, because if things, there's a technical problem, then the meeting becomes invalid. Again, the date, location and means of holding the AGM, if it's done on Zoom, that should be in the notice of the meeting. So for community groups who don't have any specific legal requirements, usually they're just following the general requirements, holding AGMs using Zoom is fine, really. It just takes, obviously, that little bit of organizing, make sure people know, it's on and how to use the technology that you're using. Okay. So what's a special general meeting then, or an extraordinary general meeting? So basically, it's any meeting of a company or an organization, a members meeting, which is not an AGM. So it's an extraordinary general meeting. Oh, sorry, there's a typo there. Or a special general meeting, which I think is what the Men's Shed template refers to it as. So it's held when some urgent issue arises or any situation of crisis and requires the input of members and the committee. So an SGM or an EGM can be called by either the majority vote of the management committee or by a certain percentage of members. So again, in the template constitution of the Men's Sheds, it would be 8 members required to hold an EGM. So it is by its nature an emergency meeting, and there should be, a profound enough reason behind it, because really if the management committee is governing correctly and dealing with things as they come up and using the systems and processes that are in place under the constitution, really you should be able to then address things that need significant changes at the annual general meeting, which happens, every 12 months. So really, if you were having too many EGMs, you'd have to question, how is this organization running? Is it running correctly, with its management meetings? But it is there for a reason. It means that you can go to the membership and get those bigger decisions decided on should there become an emergency or crisis. So the annual general meeting versus the extraordinary general meeting, just a little small piece on that. The annual general meeting is a scheduled meeting held annually. The extraordinary general meeting is an ad hoc meeting called in response to an urgent matter that comes up between the AGMs. So it could include emergency measures such as an immediate legal matter or removing a key manager when it cannot be done using the usual course of business. So but it's an extraordinary thing that or the closure. If you have to close the shed suddenly for some reason, then that would be a reason for an EGM, and the members, it would be the only agenda item, and the members, would have to vote on that. So that's a really profound decision. So something that the management committee wouldn't, wouldn't feel that they could make that decision themselves. They need to call in the membership, because this is a member organisation. The AGM is the procedural requirements are outlined in the Constitution. So the EGM as well, similar to the AGM, the procedure requirements will be outlined in the Constitution as well. It's quite similar procedure-wise to an AGM. There has to be notice given. It can be shorter notice. Generally instead of being 3 weeks, it's usually 2 weeks notice, because obviously due to the urgent nature of it, the notice can be shorter. The purpose of the AGM, it's a governance requirement to have that meeting annually, and then the purpose of an EGM is to make significant decisions which affect the organisation, that can't be done, that can't wait basically till the next AGM, and that the management committee feel that they can't do, and they need the engagement of the members in. Again, there's the notice there at the end, 21 days notice of meeting for an AGM and 7 days notice of the meeting for an EGM. So it's the EGM. It's sort of a crisis. So crisis is things that you can't plan for. They come up suddenly and they're urgent, and you need to address straight away. So generally planned significant decisions can be done at an AGM. So like if you want to change part of the Constitution, generally you can identify that during the year, have your discussions, make a plan, bring it to AGM, and get your vote on it. And it's a better decision, really. So that's a better way of doing things than holding an emergency meeting, getting everybody in. You don't have time to put things together in the way you'd like. It's not the ideal situation. So it is, by its nature, something that's done in an emergency. I'll just have a quick look at the questions. Slides will be available afterwards. Somebody has mentioned here that meetings are blended, a mix of in-person and online, how to manage voting in such circumstances. So I suppose with online, if you're able to vote, again, it depends on the numbers of members that are going to be attending and things like that, but you should be able to manage voting. If you put somebody in charge of counting the votes, you could just do a vote on say you're using Zoom, you can use a show of hand there and just count them like you would in an in-person situation. If you have an awful lot of members, then you may there's a poll option on Zoom where you can get people to vote in a poll, and then the poll will give you kind of an anonymous result. So that there's a couple of different options there using the technology. Then, due to COVID, many sheds didn't have a chance to have an AGM for the past 2 years. Is it an infringement of the Constitution? How should it be recorded? So, it is against the Constitution, in that the Constitution will specify that you need to have an AGM every year. And this can be recorded, I suppose, in management meetings if there's a good reason for it. And at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, people didn't know what to do. And I think the pandemic is a good reason. And I think that's, very relevant and real, and something that can be documented and used as a reason for missing one AGM. But I think now with the technology and the new legislation that's come in, that companies that were actually held back from doing things virtually can now do it. From a legal point of view, that community groups should be able to work it out and then have an AGM now at the next, as soon as they can. And the Constitution does specify a quorum there for the AGM. So that's just a couple of questions that came in there. So I'm just looking at time now. I'm going to just move quickly on for the last few minutes there to again cover the few more slides on the toolkit for good governance. So I mentioned it at the last webinar here. There's the Charities Regulator Toolkit uses these 6 principles and core standards to ensure good governance in a proportionate way for small not-for-profits. And it's a good go-to place for implementing best governance practice. So these are the 6 principles. Advancing your purpose. So again, we mentioned the fact that it's really important to have a purpose for your organization when it's community group and not-for-profit. Behaving with integrity, leading people, exercising control, working effectively, and being accountable and transparent. So I mentioned all those at the last webinar. I'm just going to have a few extra slides on those today that I'm just going to run through before I stop for the questions. So the first one is advancing your charitable purpose. So again, the Charities Regulator is talking about charities, and charities must advance their particular purpose. But even as a community group, you need to be advancing the purpose for which you were set up. So it's really important to make sure that in everything you do, in all the decisions that you're making, that is, I suppose, key to why you're doing things. So you need to be clear about the purpose of your organization and be able to explain it simply. So everybody should be familiar with the Constitution, which will explain the purpose of the organization. Consider any private benefit if it's reasonable, necessary, and does it add to public benefit arising from your organization. So if somebody's getting expenses, that needs to be very much required as part of their work with the organization. If you're giving people vouchers, I was at the Charities Regulators meeting during the week talking about this governance code and how it's been implemented. Definitely, if you collected public money, using it for vouchers or parties is not actually acceptable at all. So you need to be very careful, I suppose, about that. If somebody gives you some money and says that's for for you to have a party, then that's different because somebody has given it for that express purpose. But be very careful about using charity funds or funds from your not-for-profit for that type of thing. So the committee should ensure that the organisation is planning for the future and that the resources are there for the plan. So resources with regard to money or with people, and then keep checking that constitution and make sure that you're working to your the purpose of your organisation. Behaving with integrity, that's the second principle. So it's doing the right thing even when you think no one is watching. So it's not about legal, it's about really doing things just because it's your value and it's the right thing to do. It's really important in not-for-profit organisations, and when it breaks down, it causes a big problem and it's very bad for the reputation of our sector. So it's fundamental and it's led from the top. So the management committee who are in charge of governing the organisation must really be value-led, creating that culture within the organisation. They must be independent and not act in their personal interest, and maintain confidentiality. So it's always a good idea, committee members, to just have an agenda item on conflicts of interest, and if there are any conflicts of interest, to manage them, because there will be conflicts of interest sometimes, and that's okay as long as they're declared. And if somebody has a clear conflict in a decision, that they would leave the room while the conversation, the decision has been made. And having the values of your organisation agreed by the management committee and by the members, and publicising those values is really important as well as part of good governance. So a code of conduct for the board, including maintaining board confidentiality and dealing with gifts and out-of-pocket expenses, is an absolute essential. And again, the IMSA has a template, a very good template for one of those. Principle 3 then, leading people. So again, where governance is concerned, leading people is the most essential, well, people are your most essential resource, and it's really, they're the most important part about your organisation. That's why your organisation exists, and they should feel valued and have clarity around their roles. So everybody should be clear on everyone's roles. So there should be some processes, there should be role descriptions. So you'll have that in the constitution for the key roles, but even other roles in the organisation, if you can, to give people a little role description and agree that with them, so everybody knows why they're doing things. And then of course, if you have employees, there should be employment contracts in place and job descriptions, and those are legal requirements. So the people leading them and having that good culture is really important with regard to governance, and making sure your organisation is a nice place to be involved. The fourth principle then is around exercising control, and this is the legal part of it, really, legal and regulatory requirements. So your governing document is your main binding document. So if you're a registered charity or company limited by guarantee, it's a legally binding document, and as a community organisation, it is your main governing document, and you really need to adhere to what's in that document to have any kind of credibility. So management committee are responsible for the charity's funds, properties and assets, and they must be minding them all the time and consider and reduce any risk to any properties or assets in the organisation. And then if they can show that they're doing that, it keeps the confidence of all stakeholders. So again, to ensure that you are in control of your organisation, if you're on that management committee, you need to make sure that your legal form and governing document are fit for purpose. So is that the proper, for example, if you start to get very big, should you consider becoming a company limited by guarantee if you want to expand? So that would be the management committee's responsibility to make sure that that document remains, that your governing document remains relevant for what you're doing in your organisation. The management committee is also really important to identify the compliance requirements of the organisation and make sure that you're complying with them. So make sure that everything in your organisation is legal, and that you're looking, if you're not sure about something, seek advice or research it, look it up and discuss it at the committee level. If you do fundraising, adhere to fundraising guidelines if applicable. Those you can find those on the Charities Regulator's website. And you need to ensure appropriate financial controls are in place, to make sure that there's, if you're spending any money, that there's somebody, you're not putting all that responsibility on one person, that there's two people involved in it. Somebody's approving expenditure and then somebody's approving the spend. So there needs to be, the larger the organization gets, the more compliance requirements there are. So just keep an eye on that if you decide to expand and grow. Principle 5 then is around working effectively, and that's merely working as a team. So from a governing point of view, the management committee needs to work effectively as a team. So they need to be able to exercise their authority. The committee is a collective, and when decisions are made, the whole committee needs to be able to, I suppose, even if not everybody agrees, they need to be able to stand by those decisions. Healthy debate definitely should be encouraged, and then a way of coming to decisions as well. The committee should have a good mix of skills if you can get it. I know it's not always easy to get people for committees, but if you can get somebody with a bit of financial background is great there to do the treasurer role. The chairperson role really is somebody just with leadership abilities and someone who's able to manage the meeting. And sometimes it's just somebody who's really devoted to the organization and is willing to put in that time and effort. It's quite hard to chair meetings and be the chairperson because everybody looks to you and you have to be there for all of the meetings and be very involved. So sometimes really just the commitment and dedication is something really important. The management committee should be changed periodically. Again, that's easier said than done sometimes. Sometimes it's hard to get people to go on those committees. But, with I suppose, a little bit of asking people and making it, a nice and interesting committee to be on, you might be surprised at who would join it. So for the committee meetings, that's where you're kind of doing the working effectively, if you like. It's really important to have well-run meetings with agendas, committee agendas, which include things like, what are the activities of the organisation, a look at the finances, planning, looking at risk. So those things should actually be agenda items, and the conflict of interest piece as well, keep that on all of the agendas. The committee should have the full facts to make decisions, so it's always a nice idea to send out a good meeting, pack for your meetings, an agenda, and all the information that's necessary for the meeting, so people can have considered everything before they actually come to the meeting. If you can, it's a good idea as well to review the performance of the committee annually, and that doesn't have to be a big deal. Just did we meet as much as we were supposed to according to the constitution? Was everybody at all the meetings? Is somebody missing a lot of meetings? Are we effective in what we're doing? Are we managing to look at the finances at each meeting? Is somebody putting the finances together for us periodically so we can have a look at the big picture? And are we making plans? Are we keeping the minutes of the meetings? And are people reading them and approving them? So that are things working well? And people will come up with ideas, even to look at that. You might say, well, everything's fine, but if you have a conversation about it, people will invariably come up with new ideas of how to improve things, and you'll be able to get a commitment of people for things as well, which is great. And finally, the one we hear a lot about with not-for-profits, being accountable and transparent. So, when you're running a not-for-profit, you definitely want to make sure that everything's open and, you're happy to share what's going on in the organization. You should be able to justify your actions to all stakeholders. So you should be happy to tell people everything that's going on, really. So there's a difference as well between confidentiality and being open and transparent. So obviously some things are confidential, and you'll know that from what comes up, but showing people what activities the organization do, how money is spent, what money comes in, all of those things is important. If you're a charity, display the charity number on all of your materials and websites and all of that. Identify the people that you're working with, and then, you know, put in place a process for complaints and comments and queries. And you may be very small and not think, I don't need a whole policy for that, but just a one pager, or just be very, you know, clear to everybody that complaints are very definitely dealt with, and by going to the secretary or the chair or the committee or whatever you decide to do. And if there's any reporting requirements for any, you might get a grant or something that needs reporting on, make sure that those requirements are met, and it gives your organisation credibility. So now I'm on to the questions. So just about did the 2 hours on all of that. So I'm just going to stop the share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. That was very informative. Thank you. I think you've covered actually quite a lot in that, because in the recent weeks I've had a number of questions put to me, and I'd say a lot of them, I'd say all of them actually were answered in that webinar.
There was a few good few questions there came in on the Q&A, and it was, you know, asking about times and limits and all that, and that will all be in the constitution document. So when I'm organising an AGM, and the organisation I do it for is a company limited with guarantee, you know, I spend, I'd say, a full day going through the AGM for the bits and pieces that are required. There is quite a lot of preparation to any AGM, and you know, if you have a lot of members as well, then you've got the added job of making sure everybody's getting invited in time, and you have addresses or whatever. But now again, with the new changes, email addresses come, you know, you can email people out notification with this, so that helps as well.
Well, we have recorded this session, and we will be putting it up on our website shortly. I did have a number of questions after the last webinar, and Marion kindly responded to all of them. So if there's something that comes up over the next couple of weeks, please email them on to eva@mensheds.ie, and I will get an answer for that question for you on governance. So I think really, Marion, it's time to say thank you very much, and thank you for your time. We probably will revisit this in 2022. It would be lovely to meet with the men. I'm not sure what's going to happen now with COVID, but for sure we'll do something online as well. So thank you very much, Marion, and thank you. And thank you to all that tuned in. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.